the way most of these things do. Unmarked, water-stained at the corners, sealed inside a county evidence envelope that had been logged into storage in 1996 and, as far as anyone can tell, never opened again. The disposition line was blank. There was no signature releasing it, no signature retaining it. It simply sat in a climate-controlled room in a building that has since been sold twice, waiting for someone to notice that it had never actually been closed. What makes this file unusual is not that it concerns a motel. Motels appear in case files constantly. They are where things happen to people who are passing through. People whose absence takes longer to notice because no one expected them to stay anywhere for long. What makes this file unusual is a single handwritten line added near the back in a different ink than the rest of the report. It reads, "The room count does not reconcile. Recommend the building be measured." That is all. No name, no badge number, no follow-up. And when you read the rest of the documents in the order they were filed, you begin to understand why someone would write a sentence like that and then, apparently, never write another word about it again. The motel was called the Larkspur. It sat on a 2-lane state highway in the kind of country where the towns are 40 minutes apart, and the gaps between them are filled with nothing but fence line, dry grass, and the occasional stand of old cottonwoods that had been there longer than the road. If you have ever driven a stretch of highway like that at night, you know the particular relief of seeing a lit sign in the distance. The Larkspur had one of those signs. A tall steel pole, a faded board, a single word in letters that had once been red, and underneath it the word vacancy, which by every account in this file was always lit, in every season, in every photograph, for as long as the building stood. I want you to remember that detail about the sign, because it returns later, and when it does, it stops being a detail. The original structure was built in 1961. The county assessor's office still has the permit. It describes a single-story building in an L-shaped configuration, a small front office at the corner of the L, and 12 guest rooms. The plumbing diagram, filed separately, accounts for 12 bathrooms. The electrical permit, filed the following spring, accounts for 12 rooms worth of circuits. The motel was small, unremarkable, and built to a standard pattern you can still find scattered across that part of the country. 12 rooms. Everything about the original construction agrees on 12 rooms. In 1978, the property changed hands. The new owner filed for a renovation permit, but the permit was for cosmetic work only. New roofing, repainting, a resurfaced parking lot. There was no permit to add rooms. There was no permit to extend the building. There is, in fact, no permit on file at any point in the motel's history that increases the room count beyond the original 12. I want you to hold on to that number because it is the only number in this entire file that never changes. Everything else does. The first missing person report connected to the Larkspur was filed in the autumn of 1987. The missing man's name was Daniel Voss. He was 34, a regional sales representative for a company that sold restaurant equipment, and his job kept him on the highways for weeks at a time. His wife reported him missing when he failed to come home after a route that should have taken 9 days. She was able to give investigators something most families cannot: a near complete record of where he had been, because the company required him to keep receipts. The last receipt was from the Larkspur. He was dated. It was time-stamped at 9:47 in the evening, and it was for one night, single occupancy. The amount was $31. On the back, in Daniel Voss's handwriting, which his wife confirmed, he had written a note to himself the way some people do when they are tired and want to remember something in the morning. The note said, "Room 14. Ask about the noise. Room 14 in a motel with 12 rooms." The investigator who caught the case in '87 was a sheriff's deputy named Harold Mercer, and Mercer is, in a sense, the reason this file exists at all, because Mercer was thorough in a way that the system around him was not prepared to accommodate. He drove out to the Larkspur. He spoke to the night clerk. He photographed the building, and then he did something that turned a routine missing person case into the thing you are listening to now. He asked to see the guest register, and he counted. The register for the night Daniel Voss disappeared listed 14 rooms occupied. Not 14 guests. 14 rooms. Each line in the ledger corresponded to a room number, and the room numbers ran from 1 to 14, with no gaps, in the same hand, in the same ink, written by the same clerk over the course of a single evening. Mercer noted in his report that he found this strange, and that when he pointed it out to the clerk simply said that they had the rooms they had always had and that he had worked there for 6 years and had cleaned every one of them. Mercer asked to see room 14. His report describes walking the length of the building with the clerk. The L-shaped structure, the doors in a row, each with its painted number and its small concrete step. He counted as he walked. 1, 2, 3. The numbers climbed. He reached the end of the long arm of the L, turned the corner at the short arm, and the doors continued. And his report states, in the flat, declarative language that police reports use, that he counted 14 doors. He walked back and counted again. 14. He stood at the door marked 14, and the clerk unlocked it, and inside was an ordinary motel room. Made up, clean, empty. A bed, a chair, a window with the curtain drawn. A bathroom with a single towel folded over the rail. Daniel Voss was not in it. There was no sign that anyone had been in it. And Mercer, by his own note, stood in the doorway of a room that the county's own permits said could not exist, in a building he had just measured with his own feet, and could not make the two facts agree. There is one more line in that part of the report, almost an afterthought, and it is the kind of thing you only notice on a second reading. Mercer wrote that the clerk had unlocked the door before Mercer told him which room he wanted to see. He requested the original floor plan from the county. It took 11 days to arrive. When it did, it showed 12 rooms. Mercer laid the floor plan against his own photographs of the building's exterior. And this is where the file begins to feel less like a missing person case and more like something that should not have a category at all, because in the photographs, the building is longer than the floor plan allows. Not dramatically, not so that you would notice if you were simply driving past, but measure the doors against the known dimensions of the windows, count the gaps between them, and the building in the photograph is roughly 2 rooms longer than the building on the page. Mercer wrote a single line in the margin of the floor plan. It is the line I read to you at the start. The room count does not reconcile. Recommend the building be measured. The measurement officially never happened. The county has no record of a surveyor being dispatched, no work order, no invoice. But Mercer's personal notebooks, which I will come to in full, tell a different story because Harold Mercer did not wait for the county. He measured the building himself. The entry is dated to a night in the early winter of 1987, only weeks after he first stood in the doorway of room 14. He writes that he drove out alone after his shift, without telling anyone, because he had already learned that telling people made the problem disappear into paperwork. He brought 100-foot surveyor's tape, a clipboard, a flashlight, and a camera. He arrived a little after 11 at night, and the parking lot was nearly empty. 2 cars near the office, the rest of the spaces dark. The vacancy sign was lit. He started at the office wall at the corner of the L, and he ran the tape along the front of the building, door by door, marking the distance to each one on his clipboard. He writes that the night was very still, the kind of cold and quiet that you only get out on those highways, where the nearest sound is 40 minutes away. And he writes that as he worked his way down the row, he became aware that the clerk was watching him from the office window, not approaching, not objecting, just watching, standing very still behind the glass with the light off behind him, which is a strange way to stand in a dark room. Mercer reached door 12. By his tape, the building should have ended there. The floor plan said it ended there, and it did not end there. The wall continued, and there was door 13, and past it door 14, and his tape kept reeling out, and the number on the clipboard kept climbing past the figure the county had on file. He writes that he stopped at door 14 and looked back the way he had come, and the office, where the clerk had been watching him, looked farther away than it should have, farther than 100 feet, farther than the tape in his hands said he had walked. And then he writes the part that I've read until I have it memorized. He says he decided to measure it again more carefully, and he walked back to the office to start over. And while he was rewinding the tape, the light in the office sign flickered. The vacancy sign. It went dark for perhaps 2 seconds and came back. And when he turned and looked down the row of doors again, he counted 12. He walked the length of the building a third time, slowly, his tape laid flat against the ground, and it ended at door 12, against the floor plan, against the permit, exactly where the county said it should. The 13th and 14th doors were not dark. They were not locked. They were not there. The wall simply stopped. He stood in the lot for a long time, he writes, watching the sign. And he noticed that the sign was steady now, fully lit, and the building was 12 rooms long. He did not write that the building grew when the sign was lit. He was too careful a man to write a sentence he could not prove. What he wrote was this: I cannot say the two things are connected. I can only say that the night I measured 14, the sign never flickered, and the night I measured 12, it did. That is all. But it is the kind of observation that once you have read it, you cannot stop applying to every other document in the file. The Voss case went cold. It was reassigned twice and eventually marked inactive. Daniel Voss was never found. His wife received in 1990 a letter from the sheriff's office informing her that there were no further leads. She wrote back asking a single question, and her letter is preserved here. 3 handwritten lines on lined paper. She asked whether anyone had ever searched room 14. The reply, when it came, did not answer the question. It thanked her for her patience. I have spent a long time with this file, and I will tell you that the most unsettling material in it is not the architecture. It is the people. Because once you know what to look for, you find them scattered all through the record, brushing up against the larkspur and then quietly vanishing from it. There was a woman named Carol Esquivel, a school teacher driving across the state to a new job, who called her sister from a payphone on the night of her trip to say she had stopped for the night and would arrive the next afternoon. She told her sister the name of the motel. She mentioned in passing that the man at the desk had given her a room at the end, past where the building looks like it stops. Her sister thought it was an odd thing to say and asked what she meant. Carol laughed and said she didn't really know what she meant, that she was tired and that the long row of doors had played a trick on her eyes in the dark. She said good night. She did not arrive the next afternoon. She did not arrive at all. The room she had been assigned, according to the missing person report her sister later filed, was room 13. There was a long-haul trucker named Pete Lyle, who was not a missing person because Pete Lyle came back. Pete Lyle is one of only 2 people in this file who stayed at the Larkspur, noticed something wrong, and lived to give a statement about it. His statement was taken in 1991 after he saw a small notice in a regional paper asking anyone with information about the motel to come forward. The notice had been placed, quietly and without authorization, by Harold Mercer. Pete Lyle's statement is 4 pages long, and it is the closest thing this file has to a witness walking you through the inside of the building. He said he had stopped at the Larkspur perhaps a dozen times over the years, because it was cheap and it was halfway between 2 cities he ran between. He said it was always the same clerk, a thin, older man who never seemed to age. He said the most ordinary thing in the world about it, which was that the ice machine never worked. And then he said the thing that he had clearly been turning over in his mind for years, because he apologized for it before he said it. The way people do when they are about to tell you something they are afraid you will not believe. He said that the building had grown, not all at once, not while he watched, but across the years on each visit, he had become more certain that there were more doors than there used to be. He said that the first time he stayed, he was sure the building ended at a particular cottonwood tree, because he had parked under it, and his door had been the last one before the tree. And he said that on his last visit, the tree was no longer at the end of the building. There were doors past it, 3 or 4 of them, dark, curtains drawn, with cars parked in front that were never there in the morning. He said he had stood in the parking lot and looked at the tree and looked at the doors past it and felt something he could only describe as the floor of his stomach dropping. The specific vertigo of a fact that will not sit still. He said he checked out that night. He drove the extra 2 hours to the next town and slept in his cab in a gas station lot, and he never stopped at the Larkspur again. The investigator who took his statement asked him why, if nothing had actually happened to him, he had been frightened enough to drive away in the dark. Pete Lyle's answer is recorded verbatim, and it is one of 2 lines from this entire file that I think about more than I would like to. He said, "Because the doors past the tree had numbers, and the numbers were higher than the number on my key, and there were more of them than there should have been. And I understood that if I went looking for the room with my number on it, I might find a different building than the one I'd parked in." There is a smaller detail in Pete Lyle's statement that the original investigator underlined and never explained. Lyle said that on the night he left, as he carried his bag back to the truck, the clerk came to the office door and called out to him, not to stop him. The clerk simply said, "You'll want to leave before the sign settles." Pete Lyle said he did not know what that meant, and that he had not asked, because by then he only wanted to be gone. Before the sign settles. I have read every document in this file, and that phrase appears nowhere else, and I have not been able to make it mean anything safe. The clerk. I should tell you about the clerk because the clerk is the figure that the entire file circles without ever quite catching. His name, according to the motel's employment records, was Wendell Pruitt. He was hired in 1979, the year after the property changed hands, and he worked the night desk. Every guest who ever described the Larkspur described the same man. Thin, older, soft-spoken, polite in a worn-down way. He was on duty the night Daniel Voss disappeared. He was on duty the night Carol Esquivel was assigned room 13. He was the man who unlocked room 14 for Deputy Mercer and stood in the doorway while Mercer tried to make sense of a room that should not have been there. And here's the first contradiction about Wendell Pruitt. The employment records say he was hired in '79 and was, at that time, 51 years old. Pete Lyle, in 1991, described him as looking maybe 60. A man hired at 51 would have been 63 in 1991. That is not impossible. People age at different rates. But Carol Esquivel's sister, shown a description, said the man her sister had mentioned sounded old, but not that old, more like 50. And a maintenance worker who serviced the building's furnace across 2 decades stated when interviewed that Wendell Pruitt had looked exactly the same to him in 1993 as he had in 1980. The same? Not similar? The same? And there is one more thing about Wendell Pruitt. A small thing. The kind of thing no single witness would think to mention, but which becomes impossible to ignore. Once you have read all of them together, every person who described him, every single one, mentioned that he kept the office light off. Mercer noted it the night he measured the building. The clerk, standing in a dark room behind the glass. Pete Lyle noted it. Carol Esquivel's sister recalled Carol saying the office wasn't lit, but you could see him at the desk anyway. Russ Coyle, the maintenance worker, said in his interview that in 14 years he had never once seen the office light switched on, and that Pruitt always seemed to be sitting in the dark. And yet you could always see his face clearly, as though it were catching a light from somewhere that the rest of the room was not. No one made anything of it at the time. Each of them mentioned it the way you mention something too small to matter. It is only when you lay the statements side by side that you understand none of them ever saw the man in a lit room, and all of them saw his face. Russ Coyle's interview is the longest single document in the file, because Russ Coyle had been inside the parts of the building that guests never saw. Russ Coyle is the second person who noticed something wrong and lived to describe it, and unlike Pete Lyle, Russ Coyle had crawled through the bones of the place. He serviced the furnace, the water heaters, the wiring. He had access to the utility corridor that ran behind the rooms, and he said something in his interview that I want to give to you carefully, because it is the structural heart of this entire case, the thing that turns a strange story into an impossible one. He said the utility corridor was 12 rooms long. He had walked it hundreds of times. He knew it the way you know a hallway in your own home. It ran behind the rooms, with a service hatch for each one, and he could tell you without looking which hatch belonged to which room. And he was absolutely certain, he said, that there were 12 hatches. He had serviced 12 water heaters. He had run wire to 12 junction boxes. From inside the walls, from the place where the building's true skeleton was exposed, the Larkspur had 12 rooms. Exactly the number on the original permit, exactly the number on the floor plan. But from the front, from the parking lot, from the guest side of the doors, there were 14, sometimes more. Russ Coyle had tried, once, to reconcile this. He said he stood in the utility corridor at the spot where the 12th and final hatch was, the end of the building from the inside, and he had a helper stand outside and knock on the door of room 14. The door passed where the corridor ended. And Russ Coyle, standing inside the wall at the place where the building stopped, heard the knocking, faintly, from somewhere ahead of him, from beyond the end of the corridor. in a direction where there was nothing but the exterior wall, and past it, the open ground and the cottonwood tree. He said he did not investigate further. He said he finished the furnace work, and he billed for it, and he asked his company to take him off the Larkspur account. And they did. And he never said anything to anyone until the day a man from the sheriff's office came to ask him questions. Years later, by which time the place was already gone. He did add one detail near the end of the interview, when the investigator asked him whether he had ever worked at the motel after dark. Coyle said he had refused to, as a rule, after his first year. The investigator asked why. Coyle said that the only time he ever worked there at night, he had come out to his truck around 9 o'clock and noticed that the building behind him threw a longer shadow than it had thrown at dusk, and that the shadow had doors in it that the building did not. He said the sign was on. He said he never took a night call there again, because the Larkspur is gone. I should have told you that sooner. The Larkspur was demolished in 1995. The property was condemned after the owner stopped paying taxes and could not be located, and the county cleared the lot. The demolition records are in the file, and they are ordinary in every respect but one: the contractor's report, the document that records what was torn down, what was hauled away, the volume of debris, the man-hours spent, lists the building's dimensions, and the dimensions in the demolition report match the 12-room floor plan exactly. The men who tore the building down tore down a 12-room motel. The debris they hauled away was the debris of a 12-room motel. There is no record of where rooms 13 and 14 went. There is also no record anywhere in the demolition paperwork of what became of Wendell Pruitt. He was not interviewed. He did not file for unpaid wages. The owner could not be located, and neither, it seems, could the clerk. He simply is not in any document dated after the building came down. A man who, by the file's own contradictions, may have worked the same night in a desk for 16 years without aging a day, walked out of the record the moment the walls were gone and left no trace of where a person goes. Now, I want to return to Harold Mercer, because Mercer did not let go, and what Mercer found in the last years before this file went into storage is the part that I have read more times than the rest combined. Mercer, by the early 90s, was no longer officially assigned to anything connected to the Larkspur. The Voss case was closed. The Esquivel case had been transferred to another county. But Mercer kept a personal record, and that record is in the file, and it is the document that most resembles a diary. It is written in spiral notebooks, dated entries, the handwriting of a man working alone on something he can no longer get anyone to take seriously. In one entry, Mercer writes that he obtained the motel's surveillance tapes. The Larkspur had installed a single camera in 1989, mounted above the office door, pointed down the long arm of the building. It captured the doors and the parking lot in grainy black and white. The owner had used it for insurance reasons. Most of the tapes had been recorded over, but a handful survived, and Mercer got hold of 3 of them. 2 of the tapes show nothing of interest. Cars arrive, cars leave. The clerk steps out occasionally to stand in the lot, never to smoke, just to stand looking down the row of doors. The 3rd tape is the reason Mercer stopped sleeping. His description of it is meticulous because he watched it many times. It is dated to a night in 1992. The camera pointed down the row of doors shows the building as it always shows the building. And in the lower corner of the frame, at the very edge of what the lens could capture, is a door. Mercer counted the doors from the office. The door at the edge of the frame is the 14th. He also notes because he noticed everything. That throughout the tape, the vacancy sign is reflected in the window of the office, and that the reflection is steady and bright, never once flickering, for the entire length of the recording. At 2 minutes past 3 in the morning, a man walks into frame. He is carrying a small bag. He goes to the 14th door. He unlocks it. He goes inside. The door closes. Mercer writes that he watched the rest of the tape, 8 more hours of it, all the way to morning. The man does not come out. No one enters or leaves the 14th door again. And then, near the end of the tape, just after dawn, the camera catches something that Mercer underlines twice in his notebook. The 14th door is gone, not closed, not dark, gone. The wall where it had been is simply wall. The building in the morning frame ends 2 doors sooner than the building in the night frame. Mercer measured it on the screen, counting the windows, and he is certain. In the dark, the building was 14 rooms long. In the daylight, it was 12, and the man who walked through the 14th door at 3 in the morning was now inside a part of a building that no longer existed. Mercer adds in the same entry that he went back and checked the reflection of the sign in the office window in that final daylight frame. By morning, the sign was off. He does not say what he thinks this means. He only records that the door was there while the sign was lit and gone once. It was not. Mercer tried to identify the man. He could not. The image was too poor. But there is a note in the margin, added later in shakier handwriting, and it says only, "Voss carried a bag like that." I cannot tell you whether the man on the tape was Daniel Voss. The tape is not in the file. Mercer's notebook says he submitted it into evidence in 1993. The evidence log has no record of it ever being received. It is one more thing that touched the Larkspur and then was not where it should have been. The last entries in Mercer's notebook are different from the rest. They are shorter. And they are not about the motel. They are about Mercer's own house. He writes in an entry dated late in 1994 that he has begun to feel watched. He is careful about it. He is a police officer. He knows what paranoia looks like, and he writes that he has considered the possibility that the case has simply gotten into his head, but he records small things. A car parked across from his house, gone before he could note the plate. The sense, walking the length of his own hallway at night, that the hallway was longer than it had been. He writes one line that I think about constantly. He writes, "I counted the doors in my own house tonight. There were the right number. I do not know why I felt I had to count." And then there is the final entry, and it is the second of the 2 lines from this file that I cannot put down. Mercer writes that he received in the mail, with no return address, a motel key. The kind with a plastic diamond-shaped fob, the kind the Larkspur used, the kind that had been thrown into landfills with the rest of the building's contents 3 years earlier when the place was torn down. He describes it precisely. He says the fob is worn and the plastic is cracked. He says the number stamped into it is 14. And he writes one last thing beneath the description, a single sentence, and then nothing. He writes, "The little light on my porch has started staying on by itself, and I cannot remember the building ever being this long." There is no entry after that one. The notebook stops. Harold Mercer retired the following spring, and the file does not say what became of him. I told you at the beginning that this file was logged into storage in 1996 and never opened again. That is true. But I have to tell you the last thing, because it is the reason I am telling you any of this at all. And it is the reason I have stopped working on this file in the building where the file is kept, and started taking the documents home with me instead. When the county records were digitized 2 years ago, a clerk doing the scanning flagged an inconsistency in the property database. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that gets flagged and ignored 100 times a day. The Larkspurs parcel, the empty lot where the motel stood, the lot that has been bare ground for 30 years, has a building record attached to it. A current one. Active. Not the demolished motel. A different structure. Listed under a different name. With a different permit number. The clerk who flagged it pulled the building's floor plan to see what was actually out there now, because as far as anyone knew, the land was empty. The floor plan is in this file. It is the last page. Someone added it after 1996 into a file that was supposedly never opened, and I do not know who. And the disposition line is still blank. It is a floor plan for a single-story building, an L-shaped configuration. A small office at the corner of the L and a row of guest rooms drawn in the same flat architectural lines as the original 1961 permit. I counted them. I have counted them more times than Harold Mercer counted the doors in his own house. There are 14. And in the corner of the page where an architect signs his work, there is no name. There is only a handwritten note in an ink that is darker and fresher than anything else in this 30-year-old file, and it says, "The room count reconciles now. The building has been measured. Vacancy." I have not been able to find out who is keeping the records up to date. I have not been able to find out why a vacant lot has an active building file, or why that file lists 14 rooms, or who walks out to that empty stretch of highway to keep the parcel current in a database that almost no one ever reads. The county says there is nothing on the land. I have driven out there. There is nothing on the land. Dry grass, fence line, and an old cottonwood tree that is bigger than it should be after 30 years, standing exactly where Pete Lyle once parked his truck. I went in the afternoon deliberately, and the lot was empty, and I told myself that was the end of it. But I have thought since about how every account in this file that saw 14 rooms saw them after dark, and about a phrase a frightened trucker repeated to a sheriff's deputy 40 years ago, that you should leave before the sign settles, and I have not gone back at night, and I do not intend to. But the file says there is a building. The file says 14 rooms. And the file, which sat sealed for 3 decades, now contains a document younger than the case it belongs to, written in fresh ink by a hand I cannot identify, in an archive that I had believed, until very recently, was the safest place these papers could possibly be. I keep the file at home now. I have counted the rooms in my own house. They're at the right number. I do not know why I felt I had to count.